Hello and welcome to Maiden, Matriarch with me, Louise. My guest today is Finn McRedmond, journalist and columnist at the Irish Times. And our subject today was Ireland, particularly the recent family and care referendum, which the government lost. And Finn puts that in the context of previous referendums on abortion and same-sex marriage, and this question of to what extent is Ireland liberalising, secularising, putting its Irish traditionalist past behind it. In the extended part of the episode, we also spoke about Irish attitudes towards immigration and some of the recent violent unrest in response to a big recent spike in immigration into Ireland. That extended version of the episode is available at louiseperry.substack.com, where you can also find the bonus episodes I do fortnightly with my husband, the back catalogue of extended episodes, and also the MMM chat community. Enjoy. Many of you will know that Christianity is a subject of fascination for me, and the role of Christianity in shaping the modern world is a theme I return to again and again on the podcast. My view is that we really can't understand the world or ourselves without getting to grips with it, which is why I'm very glad to point you towards a new online course called 321. It's an introduction to Christianity that's imaginative, thoughtful, engaging. It assumes absolutely no prior knowledge. It's presented by the wonderful Glenn Scrivener, who has been a guest on the MMM podcast previously, and I've also been a guest on his show. Glenn presents 8 video-led sessions which are based around some beautiful animated stories that illustrate the Christian message. You can check it out for free at 321course.com/MMM. Just enter your email, choose a password, and you're in. There's no spam, there's no fees. Just visit 321course.com/MMM. And now onto the show. Okay, Finn, should we just start by talking about the referendum, and then we can use that as a lead into talking about Irish politics more generally. For those who know nothing, what was a referendum about? Why was it held? 101 stuff.
There was 2 amendments were put to a referendum at the beginning of March to modify stipulations in the Irish Constitution that would have been written in about 1937. The first one was about expanding the definition of families. The Constitution, as is, kind of limited the definition of a family to being something that's reliant on marriage. And they wanted to expand it to this idea of like anything that constitutes a durable relationship. I think it's the exact wording. And then the second one was about stipulations about women's place in the home, and the Constitution as is says along the lines the state endeavours to make sure that there's no economic necessity for women to work outside of the home. And the referendum was about deleting that one and expanding the definition of the family, and it was pretty coherently rejected by the voter. About 44% turnout, which is pretty low, especially considering the turnout of the gay marriage referendum in 2015 and the abortion referendum in 2018. And then the turnout was low, and the one about women in the home got rejected by about 74%, and the one about expanding the definition of the family by about 67%. So all in all, pretty bad defeat for the government and the referendum. That's in a nutshell what happened.
And this is in the context of the 2 other referenda that you mentioned already. So you had the same-sex marriage one, you had the abortion one. I guess the thinking was that this would be, both of which passed, right? I guess the thinking was that this would be the kind of capstone or, natural next thing in the sequence. Mm-hmm. And of course, that hasn't happened at all.
Yeah, of course. That was the government thinking, and it was a pretty dangerous and erroneous assumption. There was an idea that Ireland was kind of, after being a kind of weary old Catholic country, kind of under the thumb of Rome and papists, and that in the 21st century it was emerging as this great liberalizing force, kind of like the idea that it was an inexorable march towards liberalism, or like a totally liberalized society. And then these results have kind of complicated that narrative. But I think the government made the assumption that the country would just happily take these referendums as a symbolic gesture about Ireland's new liberal utopian values, and they were wrong.
What would have been the concrete effects if it had passed? Like, what were the policy implications?
You kind of hit on something there, which is probably some of the reasons why they failed, is because a lot of the voters were like, stop bothering us with these referendums that are symbolic. The government's argument is, it's not going to immediately give anyone any positive rights or whatever, but the constitution is an expression of a country's values, and our constitution should reflect ours. And these ideas belong to 1937 Ireland, not 2024 Ireland, and that's why we should change them. And I think that's, in a simple sense, just quite aggravating to the voter. Both that the government kind of assumed that they knew what the voter wanted, and that the government assumed that the voter would want to vote anyway. So I think no real obvious tangible impacts, and a kind of annoying and expensive thing to do.
I'm kind of more interested in the durable relationships one. That seems more logical, right? If you've liberalised the law on marriage already, if you have a lot of people, I presume that the statistics in Ireland are similar to other parts of the UK in terms of, sorry, I shouldn't say other parts of the UK, to the UK, which is a different country.
Yeah.
In terms of having massive declines in marriage and lots of births outside of wedlock and so on. So that one you can sort of see, okay, I can, there's a logic there, even if one might support the conservative model of marriage, you can also concede that the conservative model of marriage is now kind of a thing of the past, and so we should accommodate that. I find the other one more perplexing to see it as like a feminist thing, because there's also, I would say, a strong pro-woman argument for saying that, mothers not being obliged to leave their children in daycare, but having the choice as to whether or not, to having the economic independence to permit choice, like genuine choice, seems to my mind to be obviously sort of pro-women. And yet the way it's framed, I guess, is as that being just patronizing or old-fashioned, or like tell me more about the reasoning there about that component of the proposed rewrite.
The funny thing about the women in the home thing is that disagreements and dislike of the proposed changes came from all different directions. Some people genuinely thought that it was too conservative, the change, that the stipulated amendment should have gone further, massively expand the definition of who are the care providers in families and communities. So that was the people saying this amendment's too conservative, and then you have the people saying I'm conservative and I don't like this amendment, and that's coming from the position that you're coming from, which is that this is a good thing for women. This is a pro-women idea. I think that the mode of feminism that you're kind of describing and kind of I would assume adhere to hasn't really, I don't think it's necessarily a movement that's really kind of connected in Ireland yet. I think there's still a kind of, it's a very liberal, that classic liberal, slightly girl boss feminism that seems to be like the motivating factor to changing that particular part of the constitution. And this kind of natalist, the kind of movement I'm trying to describe, kind of the one that I'm sure many of the listeners want, this kind of natalist, perhaps small c conservative type of feminism hasn't really emerged as a potent political force in Ireland yet. Does that make sense?
Right. So that seeing that as a feminist interpretation just isn't available rhetorically in Ireland.
It certainly wouldn't be. It wouldn't be the obvious. It wouldn't be the obvious or looming argument when this referendum was discussed. Yeah.
So, I mean, thinking again about the concrete policy changes, the fact that it says currently in the Constitution that women should basically mothers should not be obliged to work when they have young children. I mean, what does that mean in practice? Is there actually there's no actual UBI for mothers or whatever, right? I mean, presumably that's kind of an empty promise.
It's empty, again, symbolic. It's all about this whole thing is about how the Constitution reflects Irish values and what are these values. And in terms of, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but obviously the legislation would have to be designed in light of what the Constitution says. So perhaps there will be second order and third order effects, but nothing that's like obvious. And again, it's not like the immediate creation of a new positive right.
Or indeed the withdrawal, or, it's not like
Sure,
currently
exactly.
stay-at-home mums are getting this lump of money from the government that they then
No.
have removed or anything. Yeah, okay. So it's all about battling over the sort of, the symbolic direction of Irish society.
It's a kind of way for the government to culture wars to referendum their way through the culture wars, right? And I think they think that by asking people to deal with this question directly, that they kind of insulated themselves from the political failure, and they insulated themselves from the slightly more tense and controversial aspects by saying, oh, we're asking the people if they want women to be in the home. We've got nothing to do with it. So therefore they think they're ceding responsibility, but what they really did was they just revealed a great vulnerability, which is that they don't really understand their electorate at the moment. Because again, they made all these assumptions. They said, Ireland's, we're reaching the end of history and it's just new liberalizing amendment after the other. And they were wrong, and they went too far. And I think they look a little foolish.
So tell me more about the priorities of the current government and about the campaigning responses to this referendum, like so you mentioned already there are some people who thought that the proposed amendment was too conservative. There were obviously conservatives who objected to the whole thing. Tell me more about the sort of lead up to the referendum.
The biggest difficulty with these referendums is not just that they were conceptually poorly designed, but that they were very badly run and very badly implemented. First, the process was both incredibly slow and had a huge long run-up in citizens' assemblies, and then it was really, really rushed and kind of just like landed on people's front doors, and that was surprising. They got the endorsement of the National Women's Council of Ireland, which I think was really wanted, but there's stories of infighting there, and no one could really agree on how they wanted these referendums to be worded, and so again, a lot of complicated bickering over very, very, very precise language. So that was a problem. The government didn't really have its heart in it. The government is reaching the end of its tenure. There's an election coming up. The latest it can be is this time next year. It'll probably be sooner. And I think, the government and Fine Gael have been in power for a pretty long time. And I think just naturally they're quite weary and didn't have the energy and kind of excitement of 2015 with gay marriage, and then 2018 was a really galvanizing moment for a lot of people in Ireland. And you think about how Leah Varadkar in 2018, when the referendum for abortion went through, was given like a hero's welcome. And Leah Varadkar, after, not necessarily because of, but after this referendum loss, resigned. And so I think, it's really, as much as it is about, the Ireland expressing its values or maybe rebuffing the idea that it is constantly reliberalizing, it was also just politically a failure. Mm-hmm. It's as much about the state of Irish politics writ large as it is about what we want our constitution to look like, I think.
And a rejection of the government as much as a rejection of these premises. Talk to me some more about the abortion and same-sex marriage ones, because how resounding was the approval in both cases?
With gay marriage in 2015, that was a 60% turnout with a 62% yes vote. And then 2018, abortion with a 64% turnout and a 66% yes. So, these
much higher turnout.
Much higher turnout by about 20%. You call that obviously a resounding yes. It's funny to think of 2015, between 2015 and 2018, to be a moment of national unity, especially given what was going on in Britain with Brexit and everything. But in Ireland, it kind of, it certainly was. And, campaign groups were kind of in lockstep with each other. There didn't seem to be much internecine bickering like there has been with these. And I think something else about the gay marriage and the abortion thing is that they were tangible and they were real and put forward by an energized government. But I also think that something that is quite important is we say, wow, look how resounding the yes for gay marriage and abortion was, and look how much higher the turnout was. But we still have to remember that 1/3 of the people who voted for both of those things said no. So in this narrative of Ireland as this like rapid liberalizing place, we can't forget that there is still a socially conservative chunk of the country that's actually quite large. And I think, the future government, whoever it might be, can learn something from this referendum, which is that those people vote too, and they need to be listened to, and that perhaps they just got a little bit caught up in the headiness and excitement of this rapid liberalization narrative, that they forgot about this 33% of voters that exist too.
Can I just clarify on the abortion one? So same-sex marriage, like that's straightforward, right? Presumably it was just permitting same-sex marriage. Abortion, the Irish abortion regime was very strict previously, right? And I'm aware of some particularly horrible cases, or at least one horrible case, of women dying because they weren't given access to abortion and they were having, serious pregnancy complications and so on. So it's gone from being very strict. How liberal is it now? Like, how does it compare to the UK, for instance?
It's not as liberal as the UK.
Okay.
I think it's 12 weeks.
Oh, okay.
But it's
But with
it was
some
such a volte
exceptions,
face.
presumably.
Yeah, and obviously with exceptions.
Yeah.
But I think it was such a precipitous change.
Yeah. Okay, but that's still worth, because in the UK it's 24 weeks for any reason. Well, no, technically it's for the mental health of the mother, but in practice that's for any reason. And then with exceptions afterwards for risk to the life of the mother, or serious abnormality. So it is still the case that Ireland is significantly more conservative on abortion in the law than is the UK.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
even actually many parts of the US also,
Mm-hmm.
Ireland is
Yeah,
more
so
conservative.
I think it's a really good thing to point out, actually, because it does again complicate this really accepted narrative that Ireland is the liberal country now, that Ireland is the liberalizer of the West. It is still a conservative society. It still has strong through currents of religion, and just it's just because it's changed rapidly, it hasn't. I'm not sure if it's necessarily earned this kind of
Yeah. It's not as much of a win for progressives as they might like to suggest. Yeah. I'm guessing that the people who are primarily voting against both the same-sex marriage and the abortion referendum, and indeed this latest one, were older. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, older, male, I think, perhaps more so.
And more religious, and all these intuitive things.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So one could read that therefore as, okay, we've still got the kind of the old traditionalists around turning out to vote in these things, but maybe in 50 years, Ireland will have been sort of thoroughly liberalised, and the ghost of traditional Catholicism kind of driven out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the assumption, but then that's a very similar assumption that caused this referendum to fail. So I think the whole project at the moment needs to be really investigating the core of that assumption, and working out how true it is. I don't think the country is voting to renounce the values it cultivated over the past 15, 20 years. It doesn't want this is by far not Ireland retreating back to papacy. I think really the closest to the truth you can get on it is that perhaps this sense of the capstone of Ireland's liberalising process, perhaps it's just not deeply felt enough. It's not as deeply felt as the government thought it is. It's not that the government completely misunderstands what people think. I think if you asked most people on the street of Ireland, do you think women belong in the home? Obviously, no one's going to say yeah. But I think maybe the government misunderstood priorities and depth of feeling, and that's the political failure rather than really something that's about Irish values.
Tell me about trans in Ireland. Where does public opinion lie on that? Because that seems to me that's like the next step on, right, from all of this more like abortion. It is still the case, right, that I think it was it 67, I think, that abortion was decriminalised in the UK. So we're talking almost a 20-year, almost a 60-year lag. But trans is obviously sort of the next thing along that road. Where is Ireland at with that, and what does the public think about it?
I think it's just not part of the national conversation really at all. I think Ireland, in terms of ever since 2015 in terms of LGBTQ, etc., is a good place. It's broadly accepting and liberal, but I don't think trans has even really properly entered the discourse. Certainly not the way it is in Britain. And I think you'll find in Ireland they wouldn't look at Britain and say their policy is way too liberal or they're way too conservative. I think they'll go, God, then why do they talk about it so much? And I don't necessarily believe that they're right. They're right to reach that conclusion. But I think if you say that the conversation is on a bit of a lag, it doesn't show. I think that's true, but it doesn't show much likelihood to become a big thing for a long time. And then you wonder by then if actually other places have sorted it out, and Ireland can just kind of lift whatever solutions.
Skip it.
Yeah,
exactly. I was talking about this with a friend actually about Queensland in Australia, which is the most conservative state typically in Queensland, and I think has just introduced the equivalent of the Gender Recognition Act in Britain, basically permitting people legally to change their sex. And yes, and it has done so on what I can't remember exactly when the GRA was, but has some at least a decade lag or something like that. And I was saying to my friend, couldn't they just skip it? Because we're now at the point in Britain where there's like enormous backlash. It's like, could other countries not just look at that and think, there's probably actually no need to have this enormous fight over nothing. I mean, maybe Ireland might. I think Ireland is even. I know I'm talking as if the progressive narrative is sort of unimpeachable, that you have this, you have this, you have this, and this is the progress, and everyone kind of tracks that. That's of course not true. I mean, that sequence isn't inevitable. Conservative backlashes happen all the time. Maybe the same could happen in Ireland. Like, what do you think are the chances of there being a significant backlash to recent events?
Again, as I said, I don't think this referendum is really a amazing indicator in any direction, because that ultimately was a political failure more than an expression of values, as I said. Ireland currently is extraordinarily proud of this liberal reputation. I think 2015 and 2018 were moments of great national pride, and I think national pride is a deeply held thing, and I think those things don't change. So I don't see a kind of reversal in kind of the socially liberal values, but I think it is entirely plausible that there is a conservative backlash fomenting over other questions. There were riots in Dublin in November, quite serious ones, and that was kind of anxiety over immigration that had kind of bubbled over the surface. I think, whatever happens the next election, whether we see a Sinn Féin government, I think, however that plays out, Sinn Féin kind of posit themselves as the kind of change candidate. And I think if people learn that actually wasn't true, that's often that can be a source of political upset. When you thought you had an alternative and actually you never did. So I think these are the things to watch out for. I don't think, as I said before, I don't think the values that were cultivated over the past 15, 20 years and were expressed in 2015 and 2018 and quite strongly expressed, I don't see anyone wanting to renounce that anytime soon.
It's more like the depth of feeling and the pace of change might be both overestimated. Yeah. Say on the abortion question, is the pro-choice position interpreted in Ireland as being anti-Catholic? Is it interpreted in a sectarian way? Because obviously Catholics are more hardline generally on abortion than Protestants. Like, how does that fit into?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I think it's a good question, and I think you have to think of it from the direction of the pro-choice and pro-life. And that pro-choice people broadly, I can't speak for every single one of them, they don't think that their advocacy for abortion is anti-Catholic, of course. they're not motivated by a sense of anti-Catholicism. They're motivated by all the reasons why people are motivated to campaign for looser abortion laws. But I do think there is inevitably, on the other side, on the pro-choice side, people can't help but feel that it's an anti-Catholic campaign. That's demanded by logic, right? A lot of the people who voted no will have voted no either directly out of their Catholicism or indirectly out of their Catholicism. That's the whole thing about religion, is that it kind of impacts us and kind of guides us in political and social ways that are invisible. But yeah, it wasn't a positively anti-Catholic campaign, but naturally some people interpreted it as such, because if you are a Catholic of that disposition, how could you not?
Another way of asking, is the progressive position seen to be aligned with Protestantism, or is it seen to be a third option? Is it seen to be maybe anti-Christian in general, or anti-traditionalist?
It's anti-traditionalist. It's certainly not Protestant. It's not anti-Catholic. I think it's probably just quite secular. I would say. I think, obviously a lot of Irish politics falls along the fault lines of Protestantism and Catholicism, but on social issues, I don't think that's true. I think, the idea of Ireland as a secular country is growing and growing and growing, and following like global trends, Western trends. Young people broadly, excusing the kind of neo-trad Catholic movement, are less religious than their parents, and who are less religious than their parents. And I think Ireland is just in lockstep with that very simple that very simple progression. So yeah, it's secularism rather than anti-Catholicism or pro-Protestantism. That's not the framework in which to understand this, I don't think. Yeah.
The mistake I'm probably tempted to make, right, is that because the Church of England is very liberal on a lot of things, and definitely isn't like vehemently pro-life or anything like that, or really advocating for any conservative political positions. That's of course not necessarily true in Ireland. Like there's plenty of very hardline traditionalist Protestants in Ireland. There's that kind of softening effect hasn't necessarily happened at all. But anyway, you were talking about the secularization of Ireland. I assume that we can see this in falling church attendance, and we've already talked about births outside of wedlock. I mean, like that. How rapid has that change been in terms of loss of religiosity in Ireland?
What people miss about Ireland is really how Catholic it was. That divorce was only legalised in 1995 via referendum. And referendums were attempted and failed before that. Ireland, increasingly secular, that's standard. Obviously, religion has influenced Irish politics, the politics of the entire island, Northern Ireland included, in incredibly profound ways. Religious currents are strong in Ireland. There's still a strong civil religion, but the idea of religion guiding the social values of Ireland is weakening and weakening and weakening. But just like here, like we still have weekends. That's that's a fallout from religion. Religion's felt everywhere in Ireland all the time, I think, but it's not part of how people organize their social values, unless, of course, you're an incredibly Catholic conservative, in which case it is almost the only thing that matters when you're deciding how to vote in a referendum on abortion or gay marriage, and that again is obvious. But I think the pace of Ireland's march towards secularization, again, like everything, has been rapid, but it doesn't mean that Ireland is more secular than Britain or America now. It's a catch-up exercise rather than an overtaking one.
Right. And is it very much driven by elites?
It's a good question. You still have the idea of kind of rural Catholic Ireland and your kind of metropolitan centres, primarily Dublin. Those fault lines are, as strong as ever, really. And I think, the role with elites, let's take this referendum for example, and elites misunderstanding what the country wanted, because they believed, they kind of fell hook, line, and sinker for this narrative of unstoppable march towards more and more and more and more liberalization. That is something that was assumed by the political elites, tried to be proven by the political elites via the referendum, and ultimately shown up to be incorrect. So yes, maybe this process of liberalization is guided by kind of elite Ireland, but I don't think this idea between the elite and the kind of common person, again, in Ireland exists in such a obvious way. It's not as clearly defined, but yeah, like anywhere, the elites are more inclined to social liberalism. They're wealthier, they live in the cities, they're less inclined to go to church. I think that's a pattern that we see all over the world. Maybe in Ireland that divergence is only becoming clearer now than it has been obvious in other places, and that probably is to do with a kind of distance emerging between the elites, becoming less religious, more socially liberal, etc. But exactly how that plays out and how potent that is going to be as a force, we don't know yet.
With some hesitation, I want to get your opinion on something that a friend of mine said. I mean, it's a very sectarian, very Protestant-minded thing to say, which is why I hesitate. But it was a kind of interesting insight. He wondered if Ireland, having been so strongly Catholic for so long and having basically located its nexus of political authority outside of the country, right, in Rome for so long, means that people are maybe more ready to basically to do the same thing, but just to transfer the location of that political authority, to basically transfer it to Washington. So that people are already used to basically being influenced by foreign ideology, and it's just become American woke ideology instead of Catholicism. What do you make of that theory?
Yeah, so
very sectarian theory, right?
Yeah, I think there's two things going on there. First, first, the political one, which is that Ireland often gets pushed around a little bit as a vassal of larger powers. Over Brexit, it was we're a pawn of the European Union. Britain said we're both a pawn of the European Union and, a puppet of the Democrat Party in America. I think that's not true. I think that's pretty unfair. I think it's the realization that Ireland, now wealthy with immense soft power, can actually advocate for itself and will advocate for itself, is something that was genuinely confusing to the commanding heights of British politics. So I think that's basically one assumption underlying your friend's statement that I think is not right. I think on the other side, though, the idea that it's inheriting a kind of woke East Coast kind of culture warsy type idea about the world, in the same way that we talk about Britain accidentally inheriting American culture wars. I think Ireland definitely does, but I think it's very shallow inheritance. Just like here, we import the language of American culture wars, but we don't import the same issues, right? This is Not America by Tomu. I'm sure you've read that. Britain imports the language of race politics in the United States, but it doesn't actually import the same problem. The problems exist here, but they're different. They don't follow along the same fault lines. And I think that's probably similar in Ireland. It likes the language of the woke campus elite and tries to deploy it, but the cultural issues aren't the same. As we've seen, America doesn't need to have a referendum on whether how we describe women's roles in the home. Ireland's got its own set of political oddities that aren't described best by the language of East Coast America.
Yeah, I mean, many such cases, right? It's also so bizarre to see like people marching with Black Lives Matter banners in South Korea or Japan or whatever. I mean, it kind of. I mean, there are other instances. I'm thinking of, say, Australia, which imported some of the Black Lives Matter rhetoric and imported the idea that this was a high status issue, and then applied it to Indigenous Australians. Which kind of makes sense. There's like similar issues with overrepresentation in the criminal justice system and so on. But it is also basically a fairly blunt import.
Yeah, there isn't an obvious and waiting vessel for the kind of contours of Black Lives Matter to fill in Ireland. There isn't the Australian Indigenous thing.
Is travellers a source of political tension, though?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably more a source of kind of like minor localized tension. It's again, funnily, not really a big part of national conversation. It certainly doesn't, loom large in any manifesto, or it's not an issue that's like percolating around the doll. But as with all these things, the tension will be where the potential clash is located, right? So it's localized tension if it exists, but it's not something that I see. It's not something that I see personally.
The episode is not over. There is another maybe 30 minutes of content, but it is behind a paywall. If you would like access to that content, if you would like to show support for the show, paid subscriptions are what keep it on the road. Allow me to pay my producers, put food on the table, all that important stuff. The extended version of the podcast is available at my Substack, louiseperry.substack.com. That's where you can also find, as I say every week, bonus episodes, extended episodes, the MMM chat community, all of this. Please sign up for a paid subscription. It makes such an enormous difference to my ability to keep producing the podcast and grow it even bigger, produce more episodes, all that good stuff. There are other ways that you can show your support for the show as well. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. You can like us on YouTube. You can tell your friends and family how much you like the show. If you find it valuable, all of these things make an enormous difference to our ability to keep making it. Thank you so much.